Now, I'm not going to tell Australia where our next guest comes from, but she's live right now, and Lavina wants to talk about something sensitive, and that is, of course, domestic violence. Out of respect for her and her circumstances, again, we're not saying where her location is. But what's your question for Peter Dutton tonight on this special version of Paul Murray Live? Lavina?
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on. I think there's a common theme that Albo makes proposals, but that's all they are. No houses are built. DV is at its worst, despite worded funding. How, from your experienced perspective as a former prospective policeman, would your government help women, children and men understand and support women escaping violence? And additionally, just educate without ideology or demonising boys about healthy, respectful relationships. So how would you approach this?
Well, Lavina, thank you very much for talking to us about what I think is one of the most important topics we face as a country. We need to make sure that in our own families, in our own lives, we're instilling those values into our own kids. In our own experience of raising our sons, we've always instilled in them from a very young age a respect for their mother, for Kira Lee, a respect for their grandparents, for their aunts, for their sister, and we've always been really consistent with that. And there are many families where that works and others where it doesn't, even when you've passed that on to your kids. I think one of the big concerns at the moment that I've got is the financial pressure that families are under, and the fact that that can lead to domestic violence. And it's not an excuse by any stretch of the imagination, but it's an indication of the pressure that families are under. And in many circumstances, when there's a separation, you've then got two households to run, so it becomes even more difficult. I think the family court system is clunky, would be the polite way to describe it, and I don't think in many cases it works for either party. So we've announced additional funding in relation to how we can streamline some of those services, get matters out of the court and resolved as quickly as possible. We need to provide support to police who are responding. We were up in Cairns just the other day, and whilst we were there speaking, there were 6 what they call Code 2 jobs, which meant domestic violence jobs where it required lights and siren response, so pretty serious matters, and that was just in that short period of time. So the incidence continues to rise. There's a lot of effort that we've put into reducing knife crime, and a lot of effort that we've put into as I say, protecting young women online as well. So I think it's a whole of government approach that needs to be applied to it, but there's nothing more confronting than going into a household, into a house, into a home where you've got a woman being held down on the floor, and I can picture this as I tell this story at West End in Brisbane many years ago as a police officer, and this bloke just punching into his wife, his partner on the ground, and kids screaming and blood on the walls and holes in the wall. It was just, they're horrific circumstances, and as a police officer you can go to half a dozen of those events a night, and I'm absolutely passionate about making sure that we can reduce that violence, because I believe solemnly that somebody's home is their sanctuary, and you should be safe in your own home, and it shouldn't be a place of fear. So I'll do whatever I can to make sure that we protect women and to reduce domestic violence and the violence against men in some circumstances as well, which is a part of the reality.
Thank you, Lavina. I really sincerely appreciate it. Just again to this question that Lavina was asking as well about educating men and conversations that blokes have to have. Now, I understand that these topics are fraught with difficulty, and I say this because it applies to me and my mates, and I would assume it's yourself and your mates, that we would die for the women in our lives. Yes. Because we love them, right? And anyone and anywhere was a threat. So this conversation about educating our boys is really important, and I think that in many ways it's the example we set for our boys as much as sort of public education is there as well. And again, I don't want anyone to take this part of the conversation out of context. It is a bigger, complicated one. But where do you sit about that concept of how we bring up the next generation?
Paul, I agree with that absolutely. I think the standard you walk past is a standard that you accept. So it's within your friendship group, it's within your family setting, it's within the environment that your children are exposed to, and I think that's absolutely essential. And it's taken for granted in many of our families because that's the way that we were brought up, but in many circumstances that's not the case. And I also think there's an element of drug use that's involved now as well, just mind-altering drugs that are more prevalent now than when I was a policeman. And you see some of the footage on TV where you've got 3 or 4 police officers trying to wrestle some guy to the ground who's not that, big a bloke, who's as high as a kite and just develops a strength. And when you put that person into a domestic setting and something triggers a reaction or there's a violent reaction, you see the sort of violence that abhors all of us. So the passive acceptance now of so-called sort of drugs that are freely available and part of a social set, I think that is a bigger influence than what we realise in some of these domestic violence matters as well.
Well, and in New South Wales, I mean, the stats, and I talk about this a lot, which is that, it's about 6 point something officers a day, every day, Monday, Tuesday, Christmas Day, Good Friday, are assaulted when they go to work. Yeah. And part of that, of course, is the attacks on paramedics, male and female, emergency workers, let alone that it is a huge issue, and I'm really glad that it's part of the national conversation, and it has to be, it truly does have to be confronted, and I'm of the belief that you will.